Well, hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Adam, thanks for hanging out with me again today. And on today's video, we're gonna get started on another Avante that's not an Avante. So recently I had up the trio of the Aero Avante kits, the big one on the DFO2, the medium size one on the Star Unit size chassis, and then the tiny one on the Tamiya Junior or Tamiya slot car size. This one, so far, we just have the big one. They didn't make a mid-size one. They do have a small one, and more than likely, by the time I get this one built, I will probably have the small one as well. But this one is on the DFO3 chassis, and this is also one I have never built before, so I am excited about getting into this one. And since it's nice and wet and yucky outside and I can't run the Aero Avante for that part of the video, I'm going to go ahead and start building this one. So all I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to take it out of the box, get it all spread around, take a shot of that, and then I will definitely try to take pictures along the way. And you know, if I come across anything to where I didn't understand it or I had troubles, I'll come back and talk about it. But if not, we'll come back at the end of the build and I'll let you know how it went. This build was very different than the DFO2. which not surprising. So when Tamiya makes a new chassis, you know, it may carry some of the same name, like TT01, TT02, DF02, DF03, but they're not the same at all. Not even close. And to be honest, I actually preferred this build over the DF02. The DF02 was a fun build, and it's much more of a easy to build buggy. Like I said, it kind of falls in that line of like the TT02s, to where it's a simple tub, you know, the front and rear, you just kind of drop gears in, and you know, it's not that not that involved. This wasn't difficult. This just is more involved. Unfortunately, it has ball diff in the rear and ball diff in the front. So I built them much tighter than I normally do. So hopefully no slipping out of there, but they still feel nice and smooth. I have bench run it and kind of worn them in by holding a tire and, you know, running it at low speed and holding a tire and running it at low speed and kind of, you know, going back and forth and letting it run. So they do feel nice and smooth, but don't feel like they're going to be slipping. Fingers crossed. But this is a very small little package, comparatively. The chassis is much smaller. It's much more compact and everything. I still have to cut the body out, so I have the body and the wing still left to do. Just not gonna be able to get to that today. I've been down here long enough. It could be a completely one-day build. You know, if you started this in the morning, get the chassis built, you know, get the body cut out, start painting it, get the decals cut out while you're painting it, and then get the decals on. You could probably get everything built in one day, no problem. So it's not a terribly involved build, but everything is much more compact. The motor, like, lives inside of the chassis back here. There's a little bit of air cooling vents in the top, nothing in the bottom. So motors may run a little bit hotter in this. So, you know, even in the manual, it says don't continuously run it. You know, give it a break in between runs, let things cool off. The shocks, I think they did a really, really good job on that. Now, this is exactly how they said build it. They use the Tamiya hard oil in here, so it's a lot thicker. You know, this stuff is like probably almost a 40 weight. I mean, it's a fairly thick oil. There's a 3-hole piston in the rears and a single-hole piston in the front. I was a little worried that the front was going to be a little too rigid, but yeah, and that's with no spring spacers or anything. They nailed it on these shocks. So the unfortunate thing is, a lot of times when you build the Tamiya shocks, you know, you build the shock to the spec in the manual, and then when you go to put the springs on and put the little spring retainer on the bottom, well, your spring is doing this inside. You know, it's 5-8 millimeters of play before, you know, the spring actually touches. So you actually have to compress the shock to get it to touch. The springs are already tight against the spring cups, and you actually have to push them down a little bit, and they're actually rigid springs. So it feels really nice right out of the box. So I'm pleased with that. The only thing I had to do to it, you know, any adjustments after getting it built, is I did have to dial down the steering in the front. I got the steering turned down to about 70% because there was a lot of front end chatter. The front end actually turns much further than the dog bones will allow. So I don't know if there is, I'm sure there is a CVD, you know, universal joint for these. So I may look into that. That way I could get a little bit more steering out of that front end without it going, hey. So at 70% dialed in, you know, it can go both ways, and you can just barely hear it chatter. But, you know, that's sitting on the bench with the wheels fully unloaded. You know, once it gets on the track with the battery, the arms are down a little bit flatter. Should be plenty fine. Packing in the electronics is a little interesting, and one thing I almost missed, and I thought that we were going to have an issue. Thought I may have to put a low profile servo in here. So this is, again, one of those $5 for $20 servos. They're just the, I'm not even going to try to say the name of it, but they're just the MG 935 servos. But when I went to put the screw in the back, because basically you have to mount this little tab to the front. So I mounted a little tab to the front of the servo, dropped the servo in, put a screw in the back, and the servo went bing, and it like bent up in the front. I'm like, what in the world? Looked it back in the manual, and they have little 5mm spacers. So you actually had to put 2 in the back and then 2 on the front underneath between the extension mount here and the servo. because this servo is a little bit taller than some of the older ones. What else? There's a little bit of play in the drive shaft. I thought about putting a spring, like a chunk of a pin spring in there, but driving it, you know, it stays nice and smooth. It's not chattering back and forth, so I think that's going to be fine. Diffs went together very well. No issues with that. And when you're building it, I built the front diff and the rear diff at the same time. It baffles me why Tamiya thinks it's a good idea for you to get greasy on step one and then, you know, build the whole rear end, and then on like step 12, yeah, you're going to get greasy again. You're going to build the front end. So in the manual, you know, you build the rear end diff and the gear housing and everything first, and then I just went and skipped ahead a few pages and figured out, okay, I can build this diff and this diff at the same time. You know, it's sharing common parts. You get everything laid out, works well. Same thing with the shocks. You know, they tell you to build the rear shocks and then do all these things, put the rear shocks on, and then now you're making the front shocks. Just build all the shocks at the same time. Thankfully, these don't have any little weird spacers or anything to it, so it's just kind of lay everything out, build the rears, build the fronts, and then, you know, put them on at the same time. You know, overall, really impressed with the build. The tires, this is the first time I've had the dual block tires. They're a lot stiffer than I imagined. You know, they look like they'd be really soft, sticky sport tires, but they're actually kind of stiff. So getting those on the rims took a little bit of patience, because you're trying to fight this big tire onto the wheel, and then the foam is trying to squirt out one side. So basically, I figured out I could just basically pinch it. If you pinch it all to the middle, and then go back around and set the bead on the back and in the front, worked a whole lot better doing it that way. The battery door, thought that was neat. So you have a pin, if I get my finger on it, you have a pin and a little bar that goes through the chassis, and then your battery door drops out the bottom, and put your battery in. The only problem is, you know, and that works great. You know, it was a very cool idea, and, you know, stuff we've seen on recent ones, BBX. But the oddity is, you have to put the battery in, route the battery wire up here to be able to plug it into the ESC. Because I even tried putting the ESC all the way up front, but the problem is there's not enough room for the plugs and the battery in the battery compartment. So you literally have to bring the plug up here and plug it in. Because I was like, cool, I won't have to take the body off. Now, you still have to take the body off. And, you know, there's no provisions for a switch, so you still have to, you know. It is what it is. I'm not complaining. I just thought it was interesting that, you know, you have this really convenient dropout battery door, but you still have to take the body off to get to it. Which I know why they do the battery door, because you have this big drive shaft up here and the big servo arm up there, and, you know, getting a battery in and out of that would be a nightmare. I was a little worried because the servo sits all the way back here, and then we're steering all the way up here. But overall, the steering is really tight, you know, considering that's as much play as a lot of other ones do. The only thing I did different up in the steering area was I took out the little brass bushings and replaced them with this 850 bearings. You know, the brass bushings would have probably been in there forever and ever and ever and ever and been just fine. But, you know, I've got the bearings, so why not put them in? Other than that, everything feels really nice. You know, the suspension arms, everything on here feels more race buggy oriented than, you know, a lot of the other ones, you know, that I've built. And, you know, everything's adjustable. Now, you have adjustable for your toe, you have adjustable for your camber, front and rear, but they're not turnbuckles. So you'd have to actually pop a ball cup off, turn it in, turn it out, whichever way you want to go, which is not bad, but, you know, the more times you pop those things on and off, the sloppier they get. But you do get, I think, 3 or 4 extras in the kit, so if you do start wearing one out, you can swap it over. Overall, I'm impressed with the DF03 so far. So that's going to be it for today. This was just kind of a build overview video. Hope you guys like the pictures. I tried to get as many pictures as I could to correlate with the, you know, the process of the build. And I will get the body cut out and painted very soon. And then we'll get this out. And hopefully by then the track will dry out and I can get the DF02 and a DF03 out there, maybe in the same video, and run them around. Anyway, guys, everybody out there, you guys be happy, be healthy, be safe, and I will catch you guys on the next one. See ya.